There are voices that do not simply pass through you. They settle somewhere deep, somewhere you cannot quite name, and they stay. Robin Gibb had one of those voices, trembling, warm, and unmistakably his own. It carried a kind of quiet sadness, even when the song was joyful. It was the kind of voice that made strangers feel as though someone, somewhere, understood them completely. When Robin Hugh Gibb died on May 20th, 2012, at the age of 62, the world grieved openly. Flowers were left outside concert halls. Radio stations played Bee Gees songs on a loop. Fans who had never met him wept in living rooms across the world. And then, as grief always eventually must, the noise faded. The tribute stopped. And Robin Gibb became a memory, beloved, but sealed behind silence. For the years that followed, his family kept their lives private, guarding the man they knew from the version the world had constructed. But silence has a weight to it, and 13 years after his passing, that weight has finally become too heavy to carry alone. His children have begun to speak, carefully, honestly, and with love, about the man behind the music. In doing so, they have confirmed what fans had long suspected, filled in the gaps that tabloids never quite got right, and restored something essential to the story of Robin Gibb, his full, complicated, deeply human truth. Before the scandal, before the harmonies heard by hundreds of millions of people, before the heartbreak and the headlines, Robin Gibb was simply a small boy born on December 22, 1949, in the Jane Crockall maternity home on the Isle of Man. He arrived just 35 minutes after his fraternal twin, Maurice, into a family already full of music. Their father, Hugh Gibb, was a drummer and bandleader. Their mother, Barbara, was warm and musical in her own right. The household vibrated with sound. It was as natural as breathing for the Gibb children, Barry, Robin, Maurice, and later Andy, to open their mouths and discover that the notes came easily. The family was restless in the way many working-class British families were in the post-war years. They moved from the Isle of Man to Manchester, where the boys began performing as young children in local cinemas, miming along to the popular songs of the day. It was an unlikely beginning for what would become one of the most successful musical groups in history. In 1958, the family made a bolder move, boarding a ship to Australia and settling in Redcliffe, Queensland. Robin was 9 years old. The boys were already experimenting with harmony, modeling themselves on the close vocal blends of the Everly Brothers and other acts they admired on the radio. By 1960, they were performing on Australian television, and Festival Records eventually signed them. Even then, even as a child, Robin's voice stood apart. There was a natural tremolo in it, a soft, quivering quality that sounded strangely mature, as if the emotion behind it had already lived through things a boy his age hadn't yet experienced. It was the sound of someone who felt everything a little too deeply for comfort, and who had learned to pour that feeling directly into melody. The brothers reformed under different names over those early years, eventually settling on the Bee Gees, derived from the initials of Brothers Gibb. And by the mid-1960s, their success in Australia had become impossible to ignore. But it was their return to England in 1967 that truly launched them into the stratosphere. The late 1960s should have been the straightforward part of the story. The Bee Gees arrived back in the United Kingdom and almost immediately produced a string of hits that demonstrated a songwriting gift so natural it seemed almost unfair. Songs like New York Mining Disaster 1941 and To Love Somebody established them as something more than a pop act. They were a genuinely exceptional songwriting unit, capable of melodies that burrowed into the soul and stayed. Robin's voice anchored several of these early recordings. His lead vocal on Massachusetts in 1967 made international audiences take notice, and his contribution to I Started a Joke would become, over the decades, perhaps the song most closely associated with his particular emotional register, that aching, searching quality that made listeners feel as though they were eavesdropping on someone else's private grief. But even at the height of this first wave of success, cracks were forming. Robin had always been quietly competitive with his older brother Barry over who would sing lead. It was a tension born not of cruelty, but of passion. Two gifted men who each believed deeply in their own artistic vision, and who sometimes struggled to share the spotlight. By 1969, those tensions had grown too large to contain. Robin left the Bee Gees temporarily to pursue a solo career, releasing his debut album Robin's Reign and scoring a solo hit with Saved by the Bell. The split was brief, but it was formative. It revealed something about Robin that would define the rest of his life. He was not a man who could simply accept the shape of things as they were handed to him. He needed to push, to insist, to claim his own ground. It was both his greatest strength and the source of much of his personal turmoil. By 1970, the brothers had reunited, and the Bee Gees would go on to achievements far greater than any of them could have imagined. But the patterns had been set. In 1968, at only 18 years old, Robin married Molly Hullis, who worked as a secretary for their manager, Robert Stigwood. Their bond was sealed by something unusual and traumatic. Both Robin and Molly had survived the Hither Green rail crash in southeast London, a catastrophic derailment that killed 49 people and injured hundreds more. Surviving a disaster of that scale together forges connections that ordinary courtship cannot replicate. They married quickly, and for a time, it seemed as though the worst was behind them. 2 children followed, Spencer in 1972 and Melissa in 1974. The family, on the surface, looked like a comfortable success story. But fame is rarely a gentle companion to a marriage. As the Bee Gees' international career accelerated, Robin spent increasing amounts of time in the United States, while Molly remained in the United Kingdom with their children. The physical distance between them became an emotional distance, and the emotional distance eventually became permanent. By 1980, after years of living separate lives in separate countries, the marriage collapsed. The divorce became bitter, and in one of the more humiliating episodes of Robin's public life, he violated a court order by speaking publicly about his marriage, and was briefly jailed for 14 days in 1983. For a man at the height of international fame, it was a jarring and public reminder that the internal struggles he carried were darker and more complicated than his audience could see. The same years that saw his first marriage fall apart also saw the Bee Gees reach the absolute pinnacle of their career. The Saturday Night Fever soundtrack in 1977 turned them from successful pop stars into a global phenomenon. Songs like Stayin' Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, and Night Fever dominated the charts of every country that had radio. The Bee Gees became synonymous with an era, their falsetto harmonies woven into the cultural fabric so deeply that even people who claimed not to like disco knew every word. Behind the gloss, however, Robin was struggling. Friends later recalled erratic moods and behavior consistent with the stimulant use that was common among musicians during those marathon recording sessions. Days without sleep, paranoia, volatility. He was a man capable of tremendous warmth and creative generosity, and also a man who could be deeply difficult to be around when the pressures became too great. In 1985, Robin married for the second time. His new wife was Dwight Murphy, an Irish artist and writer whose spiritual convictions and creative passions seemed to offer him something his first marriage had not: a relationship built on deep intellectual and philosophical companionship. They had already had a son together, Robin John, known to the family as RJ, born in 1983. Their marriage would last until Robin's death, and Dwight would remain steadfastly at his side through his final illness. But the marriage was not, as the public would later discover, a conventional one. Dwight had long been open about her own bisexuality and her involvement in Druidic traditions and other spiritual movements. She and Robin had, by mutual agreement, an open marriage, a fact that was kept entirely private during Robin's lifetime and only revealed after his death. In speaking to the Daily Mail following Robin's passing, Dwight was characteristically direct about the arrangement. She described herself as someone who had never been a jealous person, and explained that creative and artistic people often lived by different rules than conventional couples. The openness, she said, was genuine, born of deep mutual respect and an emotional bond that she believed was stronger than any external arrangement could threaten. That bond was severely tested around 2001, when Robin began a long-term relationship with Claire Young, a housekeeper employed in the family's homes in both Oxfordshire and Miami. The relationship was not a brief affair. It lasted for years. And in November 2008, Claire gave birth to Robin's daughter, Snow Evelyn Robin Juliet Gibb. The revelation, when it became public, created significant controversy. A source close to the family told the Sunday Mirror that Dwight had initially been furious, that whatever arrangement existed between them had not quite prepared her for the reality of a child from another relationship. Yet Dwight's own later statements were measured and steady. She confirmed that Claire and Snow had been provided for. Robin had purchased a home worth £850,000 in Buckinghamshire for Claire and transferred it to her name in the weeks before he died. Reports also indicated that a portion of Robin's estate, valued at approximately £26 million, would reach Snow, though the details of the arrangements were handled privately, with the family deliberately avoiding the kind of public legal conflict that had destroyed other celebrity estates. What Robin's children have since confirmed is that the situation, however complicated, was handled with as much care and discretion as the family could manage. Their desire was not to sensationalize their father's choices, but to ensure that every child of Robin Gibb, Snow included, was treated with dignity. Of all the griefs Robin Gibb carried in his life, none was greater than the death of his twin brother Maurice in January 2003. Maurice died at 53 following complications from surgery for a twisted intestine. His death was sudden and shocking, the kind of loss that the mind refuses, at first, to accept as real. For Robin, the loss of Maurice was the loss of a person who had been present in his life before either of them could form memories. Twins share something that other siblings do not, a particular kind of intimacy and understanding that does not require explanation. Maurice had also served as the emotional buffer between Robin and Barry, gently absorbing the friction that inevitably arose between two strong creative personalities. Without him, that friction had nothing to cushion it. In the years after Maurice's death, Barry and Robin struggled to maintain the closeness that the band had always represented. A dispute arose over a planned tribute album for Maurice, Barry feeling that the project, driven in part by Maurice's widow Yvonne, was more about commercial interests than genuine love for his brother. The disagreement became public and painful. Robin found himself caught between loyalty to his twin's memory and his own relationship with Barry, who was withdrawing from BG's related activities out of grief and hurt.